Thank you, Alex, and good evening, everyone. We've got a great turnout this evening for Jeremy. And just a few words, as you know, the regulars know, this is our 31st in the hot seat, our 9th on a virtual basis. And Jeremy, this is the second time that Jeremy has done an in the hot seat. And we all know that he was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and was one of the prime movers of the success of those Olympics. Secretary of State for Health, the longest in British political history. And then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Commonwealth Affairs, contested the leadership, was runner-up, and then resigned from the cabinet, and is currently chairman of the very, very influential Health and Social Care Select Committee. But a few points of a more informal nature about Jeremy, if I may. I first met Jeremy probably about 16, 17 years ago, and he became the candidate for South West Surrey. And you might think, oh my goodness, a nice cushy Surrey seat. Well, it was anything but a safe seat when Jeremy became the candidate. It had previously had a majority of around 15,000. It lowered every general election successively. And when Jeremy became the candidate, our majority was 861. The Lib Dems were in the ascendancy. They were confident that they were going to win the seat. And it was the sheer commitment, energy, and inspiration of Jeremy as the candidate that really turned things around in that constituency. He became passionately engaged with the volunteers and activists. And you may not know, but he built up a team of 600 deliverers of literature across the constituency and held a reception. Here's a model for everybody. Held a reception for his deliverers twice a year, of which on occasions I had the privilege to attend. His election was great fun. You could tell he was going to win, and it was down to Jeremy. A few other points. Jeremy is a very successful businessman before entering the House of Commons. He speaks fluent Japanese. His political heroes, I'm told, were Margaret Thatcher and William Wilberforce. And I understand on very good authority, but not spotted myself as evidence, he is an expert lambada and salsa dancer. But perhaps most important is somebody asked me to sum up Jeremy in one sentence. He is a gentleman, always courteous, and I've always been impressed with Jeremy's personal values of life. Jeremy, over to you.
Don, what a wonderful introduction. That is so generous of you. And if there's any Conservative Voice members within a stone's throw of South West Surrey who, after hearing that, doesn't want to become a deliverer for me in my perennial battle against the Liberal Democrats, I'll be damned, and you're most welcome to come along and join the great fun that we have. But I've been privileged to know Don for a very, very long time. And it's no surprise to me that Don set up Conservative Voice, which I think has a very, very key role to play in Conservative politics. Don, you're right. Margaret Thatcher is the reason that I'm in Parliament. She was the person who, I was in my teens when she was Prime Minister, who gave us hope that politics can be a force for good. Because before Margaret Thatcher, people had given up the idea that Britain was actually governable. They thought it was all too hopeless, and they thought it didn't matter who we elected, it's not going to make any difference. And she changed that. And I often ask myself, what would she do? And of course, her period was a different period to the period we're in now. But I think the one thing you always felt about Margaret Thatcher is that she was someone who was prepared to take the tough and difficult decisions in the long-term interests of the country. And that is a very good motto for us as Conservatives. If we are shaving in the mirror, ask ourselves that question: are we really taking the tough and difficult decisions in the long-term interests of the country? Because that's why people elect Conservative governments. So I want to be a bit cheerful tonight. We haven't had a great week in the headlines, and I just want to tell you why it is that I think that a Conservative voice in the more general sense is going to be absolutely essential to this country's long-term prosperity. When it comes to the next election, whenever that is, there are two things that I don't believe people will be talking about. One of them is Dominic Cummings and whatever Dominic Cummings is saying this week or next. I think for ordinary people, this is Westminster gossip, and they're really profoundly uninterested in it. I don't actually think they will be talking about the pandemic terribly much, because I think people will take the view, well, our government got some things wrong and some things right, just like every government everywhere in the world. And if you're going to get something spectacularly right, doing the vaccines well is a pretty good thing to get right, because it means we've got a chance of getting back to normal much more quickly. And I think people recognise that our vaccine programme has been an extraordinary success. So I doubt they'll be talking very much about the economy. And what I think they will be talking about is whether we have delivered on our commitments. And there were two very, very big commitments that we made at the last election. One was to sort Brexit, and I think that has happened. A few wrinkles in Northern Ireland, but I'm sure we'll resolve those. The second was the levelling up agenda, and that there is much work to do, but I also know much determination to do it. So why is it that I am so convinced of the importance of having a strong Conservative voice in our country's affairs in the years ahead? Well, I want to give you two reasons and then leave lots of time for questions. The first is I'm a compassionate Conservative. I strongly want to spend decent sums of money on our public services, especially our NHS and social care system. But I know, and this is what makes us different to all the other parties in British politics, you can only do that with a strong economy. And in the 21st century, we are going to have to reinvent how we earn our crust in the world. And the wealth creating party in this country is the Conservative Party. Now, Nigel Lawson did a very brilliant thing for this country back in 1986, which had absolutely no impact on the economy while he was Chancellor, which was the Big Bang that he introduced in the city. It was a bold move, and it set London up as one of the two great financial services capitals of the world. And for me, the big opportunity this century is going to be around technology and life sciences. We have 4 of the world's top 10 universities, more technology investment than anywhere else in Europe, more tech millionaires and billionaires than anywhere else in Europe. And the question in my mind is, what is it that we need to do to create a kind of big bang for technology that means that we become the world's next Silicon Valley? And I don't believe the answer is a very heavy-handed state intervention to kind of force it to happen. The thing that will make us the world's technology engine is if we create the environment for innovators, inventors, scientists, and entrepreneurs to thrive. And that means as much thinking about our education system as about everything else we do, because the human capital is what ultimately makes great inventors, great innovators. And then we need to think about how we create an environment that is safe and attractive for risk takers and investors as well. And that seems to be something that Conservative governments, the Conservative government is the most likely to be able to deliver. And for anyone who hasn't read it, I warmly recommend Matt Ridley's book on innovation, which actually talks about what it is that you need to do to create a truly innovation-friendly economy. And but that is something I think is extremely important. The second reason why I want a Conservative voice to be extremely strong in the years ahead relates to a date that I suspect very few of you have given much thought to at all. And that date is 2028. Now, why do I mention 2028? 2028 is the year that the Centre for Economics and Business Research, which is a very respected think tank, says that for the first time in our lifetimes, something profoundly significant is going to happen. In 2028, they say, for the first time ever, the largest economy in the world will not be a democracy. Because 2028 is the year that the Chinese economy in dollar terms is predicted to overtake the American economy. And this will be a profoundly challenging moment for those of us that believe in open societies and the Western liberal democratic model. And we need to think very hard about how to do it, how to cope with that situation. Because tempting though it is to say, well, we might end up having to fight another Cold War, it's going to be more complex and difficult than that, because the underlying reason that we won the Cold War was that we were able to bankrupt the Soviet Union. The historical piece of luck was that we had statesmen like Ronald Reagan, Gorbachev, and Margaret Thatcher on the scene to seize the moment. But what made Gorbachev wake up and smell the coffee, to quote Michael Ashcroft, was understanding that he was being outspent and bankrupted by the West. Now, that's not going to be the case with the Chinese economy, because in 2028, they won't just overtake the US economy, their GDP per head will only be a quarter of that of the US. So they will set themselves on a development path to have an economy 4 times the size of the US. So bankrupting is not going to be an issue, and we need to find a way to live alongside them that is consistent with our own values and keeps our own way of life safe and secure. And that is why we need to think very hard. And, you know, if I was going to answer that question, what would Margaret Thatcher do? I think she would say, we have to negotiate from a position of strength. And that means we need to have a strong economy. We need to have strong armed forces. We need to have a tightly formed Western alliance so that we're not just operating as single countries. And we need to make sure we preserve our moral authority. We need to avoid doing things that allow other countries to say you're all just as bad as each other. And that commitment to free and open societies is something that Conservative governments, year in, year out, have demonstrated they understand best. My final comment, and I'm not trying to be gloomy here, but I do want to inject a note of realism about the way the world is going. The last century ended up with a really remarkable position of more democracies, more freedom, more trade, more respect for human rights, less poverty than ever in human history. I was born in 1966 when half the world lived in extreme poverty. The definition of extreme poverty is less than $1 a day. And because of inflation, today's definition is less than $2 income a day. And instead of half the world's population, in that it's just 9% of the world's population. The global order that was set up by the United Kingdom and the United States after the Second World War has been quite simply the most successful in the history of humanity. And I believe that Britain has a very special responsibility in the century that lies ahead. But here's the challenge. We got to that position at the end of the last century after 2 world wars, a Holocaust, and numerous other genocides. How do we make sure we get to the end of this century with freedom, democracy, human rights, even more deeply entrenched than they are today, without having to pay the terrible price that our ancestors paid in the last one. That's where I'm going to leave it, Alex, for now. And I hope that's given you some food for thought, and happy to answer questions on anything at all.